Bum bum bum, literature gets a look. Let's talk about books. Greetings and welcome to Legs Talk About Books, the monthly literature podcast where we talk about books. Hi, I'm your host Hardleg Joe. Joining me today, as with last episode, CB Radio, also known as Brandon.
Yeah, I'm literally happy to see you.
Yes, and in this episode, we're looking at The Furies of Calderon by one Mr. Jim Butcher.
Jimathan Butcher.
Jimathan, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's short for Jimathan.
Yeah.
Who you may know is the Dresden Files.
Yeah.
That's his main...
It's still going on, too. That's the ridiculous part.
Yeah.
He's still making books for it.
That's his main series that he's known for. I think that was made into like a movie or a TV show.
It was made into a TV show, short-lived. He's also got another book series right now. It's kind of steampunky, but
this is his classical fantasy look at it. The series is called the Codex Alera, which I think Alera is the name of the world, right?
Alera is the name of the world.
And it's all Roman themed.
Well, it's more of the name of a country, sort of, because
almost everything takes place in Alera.
Yeah.
At least in the first book. That's what we're looking at mostly. Brandon has read many of the books, or listened to them, rather.
Yeah, I've listened to them. I wish I had the constitution to read things, but I'm more of an audiobook guy.
Yes, and I'm more of a book guy.
Yeah.
So that'll be some of the fundamental differences, looking at, like, the reading experience versus the audiobook experience. But yes, the first book, Furies of Calderon, that's what we're looking at today. And before we get to talking about just the interesting things we thought about, just general recommendations. Brandon, what did you think about this book?
I enjoyed it. It was something that got me hyped to read more of it, but it was more of it has this kind of first movie, kind of like New Hope, kind of like...
It hints at a lot of stuff.
It hints at stuff, but if it ended there, it would have been fine. Good popcorn fun. I'd give it about a rent. So if you can find it at a library, pick it up from a friend... It's not a specifically must-read thing, but it will be enjoyable whenever you get around to it. What about you, Joe?
My scale as far as how I rate things is, like, what kind of person I think would enjoy this. And really, it's a very Brandon book, which doesn't say much for the second episode, but it does have that, like you said, it's got that summer blockbuster kind of feel. If you want just, like, compelling action, relatable characters, it's very hero's journey-ish.
Kind of a tropey fold.
Yeah. It's full of a lot of tropes. Like, you're not gonna read this and, like, learn anything new or see anything that, like, you've never seen before. This isn't going to change your life. It isn't gonna make you view the world differently. You're not gonna learn anything. But if you want a cool action book, like, there you go. Which, for me, not my kind of book, to be honest. I didn't really enjoy that all that much. If you're someone who reads a whole lot of fiction, if you've read a whole lot of fantasy, I feel like you could skip this one, but at least the first one. I've heard it gets better on the second.
That we will get into later, but this is pretty much our spoiler-free. We want to just get you there, and coming after this point, we're pretty much going to get deep into the story, so if you don't want to get anything spoiled for you, and you want to go out and read this yourself,
go ahead and do that now.
Yeah, cancel push the stop button, read it.
Pause button. Pause it, put it in a small tab, and then in a month when you're done reading the book, then come back. Or however long it takes you to listen to the book.
You're talking some magic level computer stuff. I don't know what you're talking about.
Some people just leave their tabs open forever.
Well, that's just a bit.
But yeah, that's just our general recommendations. Brandon says go read it. I say, man, unless you really like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And from there, we're just going to be discussing things. And as with the previous episode, as with all episodes going forward, we're not really going to be giving, like, we're not going to be giving a whole summary of this. We're not going to explain the whole plot. The way I see it, you've either read it, or you're not going to read it. And if you're not going to read it, we're not going to replace
hold your hand through that, yeah.
Yeah. We're basically using this podcast to talk about interesting things that this book brings up, or interesting thoughts that it makes us think about literature, or about, in this case, as we got on our first point up here, hard magic versus soft magic.
Yeah, this is something that we touched on last episode a bit, and we wanted...
on the previous one, we had sort of like a back and forth about what counted as hard magic and what counted as soft magic.
And you yourself have been doing some more reading, and I've already had...
Yeah, I've looked up a lot more about it. I understand it a little bit more. I think I had this misconception last time that things fell into either hard or soft magic. And it really is much more of like a spectrum of things sort of like falling along the line. Like things can be harder or softer, but very, very few systems are just like pure one or pure the other.
And this one really leans leans more towards hard magic on this, because it's the magic system in this world has a bit more rules. It's got sure, you can command the wind or the earth or trees or water and all that stuff, but there are things that cancel it out pretty hard, and there are limitations to what you can do.
Yeah, if you're unfamiliar with the magic system, just really briefly, it's basic elemental magic for the most part. There's 6 elements: earth, wind, water, fire, but then also wood and metal.
Yep. That
they add into that. So it's slightly different. But basically each person has command of one element, sometimes 2 if they're really good.
Mm-hmm.
What makes this the sticking point for me, though, and the reason why I think this isn't as hard as it sort of seems like, is the titular Furies themselves. Because it's not like Avatar where you control the elements. There are Furies, which are like these forest sprites, or they're like these natural things. They talk about like when winter comes, there's a big, huge like fury in the sky that brings it. Or in the first book, near the beginning, they get caught in a storm and there are fury wraiths. Just these uncontrolled wild furies that come and try to kill you. And basically each person at like a certain age, like they find a fury that they can control or like bonds with them.
Yep.
But then like they can kind of control other furies a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of like having an animal that you wrangle, that you can wrangle other animals that are like it. It's kind of like having a wolf and having it command other wolves and other stuff.
Well, then they also point out, I believe, it doesn't get used a lot, but they're like Asana, the main woman.
Mm-hmm.
She is a water fury crafter.
Yes.
And like her main thing is water, but she also like at the beginning she's cooking and like she can control fire furies to like heat up a pot. Like she has a little bit of control over the other furies. It's just like only enough to like start a small campfire or something.
Yeah. No, this is something that they actually to get into another point, they expand on in future books, but in this book it's very nebulous. It's very like, hey, these people can control the elements, and here's their limitations, sort of.
Yeah, the thing that bothers me is, like when you look at hard versus soft magic, which is specifically, this was a term in a paper by, Brandon Sanderson, I believe. That's where all these terms come from. But a lot of people have made a whole bunch of videos about it afterwards. But, it often gets referred to Avatar: The Last Airbender as being a fairly hard magic system, because you're limited to what, like, earthbenders can only bend earth, and they're limited by having access to earth, and they can move it around. And then there's also this element of, like, it's almost like a martial art. Like, you can only do what you know, like, the skills you know how to do. If you have the proper technique, and the proper strength, and the proper endurance to continue to do those activities. And what really separates Furies from that is the fact that, because the Furies are doing things, it's not like limited. There's less of a sense of how much control the person has and how much the Fury has. Like when you use fire crafting to shoot a fire, is it powerful because the person is powerful, or because they happen to get a good Fury, or is it because like there's some technique to it? Can they get more powerful or stronger?
Again,
none of that is really made clear in the first book.
In the first book, but I think they do touch on it a little bit in the book. It's been a bit of time before I've read it. But in future books, they do disclaim how it is more of a force of charisma and a force of will upon the creature. And they bond, and they also get in this weird thing about like, how you find out in the bigger cities, and also this, interesting about the society itself is that it breeds, they have kind of like, they specifically breed their citizens, like powerful crafters of these Furies, must or should marry and have other, powerful crafters.
So there's a genetic element to
There's
it?
a genetic element to it, but it is also a force of charisma and willpower.
And it's also a force of nature because these exist. Like I said, to me, it really comes across as like, if you looked at Pokemon as a magic system, like, how strong are the Pokemon? Is it the trainer doing them? Is it the strength of the Pokemon? How does a Pokeball capture stuff? Like, to me, it just comes off as like really nebulous. I think that's what bothered about me, because at first I mistook that for being soft magic, and it's not that soft magic is bad, or even that is soft magic, it's that it mixes elements of hard and soft, and it kind of, like, bothers me.
Yeah.
At least personally, both because just of how cliche, like, elemental powers are, and how it was handled, where I didn't understand what the limitations of the powers were. It really didn't come off as compelling about me. The battle scenes where they're fighting with their hands, I thought were much more exciting.
Oddly enough, though, actually the what restricts them is actually discovered in the first chapter. Just to give a quick summary, a couple characters are captured and then put in cages, and they're specifically put on, a crafter of earth is specifically held in a metal cage above the ground. And the one who crafts wind is put
underground, yeah.
Thus showing that it's just talking about like how it cuts off the connection with them.
Like they have weaknesses, there are elements there, they have rules, but at the same time it's like, I have no idea what the strength is.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I don't mean to skip over we have a list of talking points, but to skip over a little bit into the world building, cause it kinda has to do with this. Cause I feel like, there's parts of the world building I like, but there's parts of it, especially for me, like after reading Dune and after reading like Wheel of Time and stuff, that feel really poor. And the best example I can think about this is Fire Fury crafters have the ability to like enrage your emotions, to make you feel fear and to make you feel like angry or doubt. Just like these negative emotions, they can kind of increase them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this scene at the beginning where someone gets brought in and they're hurt, and the water crafter wants to heal them, and all the other people are like, I don't know, I don't think we should help her. And everyone's kind of confused why, until they realize, like, oh, the fireplace, the hearth, this fire crafter is using it to make everyone feel afraid and doubtful. And it's like, it's a neat way to show off what the powers can do. But at the same time, I'm just like, these people have grown up with fire crafters their whole life, and no one was like, oh, maybe the clearly evil firecrafters we brought with us are manipulating us.
Well, they also established that most of these people are using them not for malicious gain. So most of these kind of more dubious ways of using the crafting are not used primarily.
It's not used primarily, but it still feels like something like they should be aware of.
Well, it's also pretty obvious as to how he actually gained that ability, because they show later on that he is the son of a slaver, and they use those negative emotions and other such things to
keep the slaves in line and everything. And again though, that's the thing, like, he's a slaver, and at the beginning, like, they're in this meeting.
You don't actually know him at the beginning.
I mean, you don't know, but the characters know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's one of those things, like, at the time when you're reading it, it comes across as like, oh, you're learning about the powers and everything. But in retrospect, thinking about it, it's like, shouldn't the characters should have already been aware of this. And it's weird that they don't, like, think about it.
That's again why this is a good kind of summer blockbuster, because it's not something that's gonna be...
It doesn't hold up to a lot of scrutiny.
It doesn't, it's not, you're not looking at it's like watching Arnold Schwarzenegger tear through 17 guys with just a pocket knife. You're like, oh, wow, these other guys are highly trained fighters, and they didn't decide to pull the trigger. They just were like, I'm gonna wait and fight this giant man mound of muscles with my bare pinkies here.
Yeah. And like I said, when it comes to, like, the action and stuff, like, when they're using their Fury crafters to make, like, wolves of stone that are fighting, and like, oh, they get thrown around, and like, I'm fine with the physics. Again, it feels weird from a world-building perspective, like, especially compared to something we're going to be looking at future, like in Mistborn.
Mm-hmm.
One of their powers is like you can push and pull emotions, and they go in depth talking about like how you can tell when you're being manipulated, how the people in charge specifically have people who like look out for that stuff and learn to recognize like, hey, someone is trying to manipulate my emotions. This is artificial. You have people when they're in a certain situation and they're like, I'm going to leave and wait for this guy to leave because I know he can do this and I don't want to make a decision while he's around.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things like, oh, that seems brilliant compared to Furies, where it's like, it just makes me wonder about like how the whole politics of their system works if they know that any source of flame can manipulate their
Oddly
emotions.
enough, you do find out later in, like, again, it starts in a little podunk town and it primarily keeps around that. Once you get to the bigger cities and such, that's where you find out that, these characters, that you actually find out that having more than one ability to use Furycraft is kind of passe. It's something you can do that, obviously.
Yeah.
You said they form them into dogs and lizard creatures and such.
Yeah, they have like a physical form. Some of them do.
Some of them do, but that's one of the more interesting things about it is that like, in the book directly after this one, you find out that in the big cities, they had like debates in academics about whether or not all Furies have like a form, or if that's just the person putting their understanding of it into a form. Because with like the multiple craft, the people who craft multiple ones, they use Furies so much they don't actually have Furies tied to them. They're just like throwing them around, and they don't actually form into anything, which is kind of interesting.
Again, it's kind of like, it's one of those things where they they bring it up as a question in their academics, but it's like,
they don't answer it.
They bring it up because it doesn't have an answer in it.
Yeah.
And that's a little frustrating to me, where it's like, we've built this whole empire on these Furies, and we're not even sure if like they have forms or not, or if they have strength, or if it's the person.
That was one thing I was going to say about maybe not the world building, but the setting. They've gained mastery over through discipline, and in an interesting turn that I've not actually seen in a lot of fantasy stories. This is a society built pretty much after the fashion of Rome. And actually, you find out later in the later books, these are literally Romans. They're actually
it's like alternate history Rome.
Alternate history Rome, sort of ish. They kind of just say that the people that they have in their past that they can't actually define, because they think it's a myth that these people did all these things without Furies, and they're just like, they call themselves Romans. And and
then they got Furies, and
they got lazy.
Changed. Yeah, and that's why everything's still like medieval times.
Well, not medieval. It's more along the lines. I wouldn't even go medieval. I'd go like, this is
the classical period.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, but that's the weird thing to me. Also, is like everything's stuck in this sort of antiquity. There's no like light bulbs, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the one thing they bring up, the fact that like, oh, using Fury crafting, they built like these necklaces that can mind control you, but no one has like light bulbs.
They do. They
have like ever burning flames and stuff that have to be stoked. But it's like, if you could build something with like an ever burning flame inside of it, which again, maybe it appears more in the cities and stuff. They're kind of on not the outskirts, but
again, this is podunk. This is rural Alera.
Yeah, they're very rural. They're very near the borderlands between the barbarians, essentially.
Mm-hmm. In fact, effectively, they do talk about how like cities are lit with Fury lamps, which is just like ever burning fire things, and they use them in those kind of ways.
Yeah, it's just weird that like I understand when you have like a medieval setting. Like a D&D style setting, and like wizards are rare. Wizards are occasional, so not everyone has access to it. But this is a civilization where like every single person has magic, and yet everything's still stuck in like the classical era.
Well, this actually I'd harken back to kind of Avatar: The Last Airbender. You actually see that in Avatar. There's a lot of people who are benders and all this stuff, and it's still stuck in this very dynasty-ish.
Well, see, the other thing about Avatar, though, is not everyone can bend in Avatar.
Not everyone.
This is like, imagine every single citizen can bend. And it's like, I'd imagine that society would just be completely, like, different from anything we've seen on Earth.
But this is also, again, genetics. They've the higher societies.
Yeah, some people are better with it than others.
Are way better. Like, scary better and all that stuff. But it's also kind of just, the structure of the actual government kind of, and the society and such kind of make it so that forward progress doesn't exactly sound like the best thing. Like, at the end of the book, the big-time ruler of the entire kingdom comes down because they've done such
saved the day, everything's good.
And the kingdom, the ruler makes Isana a landowner, effectively. He makes her literally a steadholder, a ruler of a small plot of land,
which is completely new and foreign to them.
Yeah, in the next book, they pretty much
can own land.
Yeah, they pretty much. That's the most forward progression they've had in probably 1,000 years.
Yeah, which again, it just seems weird. Now that I'm talking about it out loud, I think that's what bothers me. It's not that like I'm fine with the Roman setting. I'm fine with the not the fire, but the Fury crafting.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes it weird is that, like, how did Fury crafting lead to a Roman-style civilization? It almost feels like he picked these two things he wanted to do and put them together, and didn't think about how, like, a society would form with Fury crafting. Because that's the thing, like, Rome formed up without Fury crafting. If you add that element in, things would be, like, dramatically and vastly different. In a lot of ways, like, some ways they are, but in a lot of ways, things are just, like, directly taken from there.
Well, effectively, like I said, this is actually Rome if they got magic.
Yeah.
So it's his way of thinking about that. He, no idea if whether or not Butcher did some he did some research. He did some pretty good research into Roman society.
Oh yeah, he did a lot of research about Rome. I'm just saying, I don't think he should have. I think he should have made his own. But again, that's, you know, like you said before, the summer blockbuster feel. I'm reminded of the Mortal Engines that just came out.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's London, but it's on top of a machine. And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense, but it looks really cool. So it's like, if you wanted to see Roman legionnaires, like, using fire magic and using, like, airbenders to fly them through the skies and, like, sweep down and attack, and metal benders are, like, making their swords on fire as they're, like, attacking. Like, yeah, that's really cool. For someone like me who wants to, like, look at the lore and wants to look at the world and think about these ideas, it's like, it just kind of doesn't make sense.
The first book is again, a super summer blockbuster. Unlike a lot of, like, Dune and Lord of the Rings, I don't think he actually had a lot of this fleshed out, and if he did, that's good for him. But he decided to choose to fill in all of those gaps and kind of, I think it may have tried to make them kind of the hook for, like, oh yeah, you were interested more about this world? Well, here's more stories and more
That is one thing I will say that he did really well, which is not on our list, but even though, like, I finished it, I had zero desire to read the second book, but it left so many, like, open questions where, like, they kind of bring up, like, oh, Tavi's parentage is mysterious, and it never gets solved.
We already know.
They're like, oh, they do this thing in this forest with, like, blood gets on the goop or whatever it is, and some sort of creature comes out, and, oh, well, we're not gonna look about that later.
That actually just gets resolved in the next book, and it's pretty flippin' terrifying, by the way.
Yeah, but it's just one of those things, like, I've read, like, the Gentleman Bastards book, and I read The Name of the Wind, and I didn't really want to read the second ones on those, but I also I was like, I felt like the story wrapped up fairly nicely. Maybe not Name of the Wind, but Gentleman Bastards. With this one, it's like, it finished, and I was just like, went to the wiki immediately afterwards and looked up everything.
Like, what exactly is gonna happen,
so
man?
It's like, if you enjoyed that book at all, it definitely leaves enough stuff to
for
interesting.
More, yeah.
And from what I could read from the wiki, like, it ends up being pretty epic.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not fully done, but I'm like one or two books away from the end, and it has already sprung epic leaks of mass proportions. But let's get on to some other points on this. Like,
yeah, well, let's see. Looking at a lot of our things kind of mixed together. Like, the hard and soft magic is sort of like why I thought the world building kind of felt poor. Which, like I said, I get to.
And we've already gotten onto, and
the setting.
But if you had a problem with the villains,
not all the villains.
Fidelius, I take it.
Fidelius I like. He's bad, but he has reasons for being bad, and his reasons for being bad are not just like, I'm greedy.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, he honestly thinks what he's doing is for the best.
And then you've got other ones like, what's his name?
Well, there's like the sword fighter. I forget his name, who works with Fidelius.
Oh, I love him, but he's
and Ophelia, I think.
Ophelia's just nuts.
She's nuts, but again, like her everything she did made sense.
Mm-hmm.
When she was ordered, like that's the big thing about Ophelia. At the beginning, she's a bad woman. She tries to murder a kid. She does all sorts of stuff. But it's like at the beginning, she's told to attack the what's her name, Izana. And then she and Izana get trapped by the even more villain, and then they end up working together.
Mm-hmm.
And that villain guy who traps them, he's the one that, like, I believe he drags the whole story down.
Yes.
Because he is so one-dimensionally, stupidly evil, where it's like, no matter what's they're like, the entire civilization could be torn down by barbarians, and he's like, I don't care, I'm going to find a way to kill you in the middle of this battle. He just, like, tracks them down no matter what, no matter how poor it ends up for him, no matter how little sense it makes.
It does sort of make sense on him because he's going through what he would consider grief. But essentially, a
little bit, but it's also like, again, even like, you look at Ophelia and again, that her sword master boyfriend or whatever his name was.
He has a dope ass name and I'll remember it by the end of this.
Yeah, it's some Latin thing.
It's super cool. I'm gonna look that up.
He's just like, he kind of frustrates me a little bit because he's like a sword fighter, but he manages to beat all these people who have like fire powers and earth powers and stuff,
mm-hmm.
which is like kind of cool, but at the same time, it just feels like weird. It'd be like if a knight story and you had a guy who fought hand to hand with like knights on horseback and won. And it just feels like he's like OP for no reason. But, yeah, like with him, it's like he's a mercenary. I understand. He doesn't have qualms about doing things. He works for the dollar, but he still makes decisions that make sense. And again, I can't remember the bad guy, I'm calling him the dumb bad guy.
Yeah, he's I think it's Sloan or something like that.
No, not even close. I forget. He's the one, when we're talking earlier, they're all in the common house, and the flames, and him and his sons are like using the flames to manipulate people and stuff like that. Like, they're just, from the moment he's introduced, he's just like an unrepentant jackass who actively hates everyone, and who everyone actively hates. And it's like, but he's a landowner, so we gotta do what he says,
mm-hmm.
or we gotta tolerate him. Plus, he could kill you if you actually...
He's a formidable opponent, that's one thing.
But he's just the biggest, strongest bully. And every time he's on there, I'm just like, why does anyone tolerate this guy?
Why would you even? Yeah.
Yeah. And none of his his motivation is just like, I enjoy being cruel and mean to people because that's how I am. It's like, I guess there are some people like that, but I feel like even if you do that, you have to have some semblance of, like, civilization. Like, you have to be a decent guy at least some of the time. Everyone has a boss or someone who looks down on them, unless you're, like, the king of the world. Unless you're, like, the main guy. But even if you're the main guy, like, you have advisors and you have people who would probably assassinate you if you were just, like, as blatantly evil as this guy is.
Her name is not Ophelia, it was Odiana.
Odiana.
Which is actually a much prettier sounding name, to be honest.
I know it starts with an O. I mess up names a lot because I read them, I never say them out loud.
And I listen to them, so I have the ability to be like, that's actually how it's correctly pronounced. Why won't you? Damn it. Never mind.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I just really wanted to remember his name, because Odiana's boyfriend is freaking dope sounding name.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it was like Maximus Aurelius something, but that's...
Yeah, it was some badass Roman-sounding name.
Yeah, but yeah, the one character that gets, that we haven't discussed yet is actually one that it's a trope, but I really, really loved it, was, the manservant of, the main character, Tavi, and of,
Shade?
Yeah, Fade.
Fade.
And his aunt. And he's just this, he's supposedly this stupid guy. He's this, like, dumb in the sense of, like, mentally handicapped.
He seems mentally handicapped. He was like in the war, and he has this like mark on him that marks him as a coward.
Actually, it's across his entire face, so it's kind of, it just like,
yeah,
it defines what you look at when you see him.
You get this feeling like he was injured in the war, and that was why he kind of like ran away.
Mm-hmm.
And like he sort of like stumbles. I get the feeling that whenever I imagine him sort of looking like Disney's Nostradamus. Or not Nostradamus.
Nostradamus. You mean the Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame?
Yeah, the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Okay, yeah.
He's got kind of hunchback, like, I don't think he actually has one, but the way they describe him, he just always seems like his face is kind of half melted, and he's like, Tavi, stay. Like,
yeah.
he talks in like one or two words.
He talks in stutters and all that such, but then you find out he's got like this, a bag that's already packed and ready to go.
It has all these supplies in it.
And he's got this dope looking knife. And
he
you're like,
knows how to ride not a horse. They don't ride horses, do they?
Yeah, they ride horses.
Yeah.
He knows how to ride a horse. He also knows like,
he has survival skills, despite the fact that people in the common house, they punch him and he's like, oh, no, Taffy bad.
Yeah, they treat him pretty much like he is, the town idiot. Yeah. And they even say in the story that he's got like, very little crafting, which is a sign of like your lower rung society, effectively. Now, the spoiler at the end of is like he then at the end of the book
is a better sword fighter
than the
sword fighter guy who already was so good that he killed people with magic powers.
And he has one of the coolest lines because he literally like the big sword fighter guy is about to kill the main character, about to slash down Tavi, and then he just steps in and like offhandedly in like 5 strokes just takes him out. And then the main character is like, why, what happened? He doesn't turn around and be like, Tavi? He's like, well, you see, he always thinks in circles, so I thought in squares. And you're like, what?
It was the opposite.
But yeah.
It was he always thinks in, cause the whole thing was, the main guy, he had these like, the main sword fighter guy had these really sharp slashes, these really hard jabs, and Fade was like, basically parrying him, and his sword was like cutting through the ground that they were fighting on. They're fighting on like the ramparts of this stone statue. So he keeps parrying him and he keeps slicing into the stone and everything, and then eventually the stone collapses underneath him. And he's like, what happened? He's like, oh, he always thinks in straight lines. He had a problem with circles.
Yeah, just this.
Or I taught him to think in curves, where it was like, oh, he was redirecting everything and all these.
It was
angles.
just like this very like obviously he was thinking. This wasn't like some savant crap where you're like, oh, maybe he's just really like no.
See,
he's
that's
faking.
That's what I thought. I thought that like
until he spoke.
No, I thought when he spoke, I thought the whole thing was that he was actually injured. He was actually mentally ill, but then he had like a moment of clarity where whoever he was beforehand came out.
I a little bit had that, but later on in the book, you kind of get
find out he's just been pretending for decades, for so long.
For a decade and a half, but yes, for a while that he has just been faking it. And I'd say that's actually a pretty good build-up reveal for a story.
I have mixed feelings about that, because on the one hand, it was cool. It wasn't entirely unexpected, like it didn't come out of nowhere, but when it did happen, it was like, really dramatic and badass, but at the same time, it just like, it feels so unrealistic, like there's no way. How could no.
How could he have been fooling everyone for so long?
Like either that he was cause again, it's like, I was already stretching my belief to believe that this guy was that good with the sword, so to have Fade come in and be like, you know, somehow he's either so amazing that he could beat that guy out of practice, or he's been secretly practicing and no one in the town ever saw him.
Well, to be honest, it's one of 3 things. First off, throughout the entirety of the story, that mark on his face is literally a brand of cowardice.
Yeah.
It's something that people, when they look at you, they see you're this. So it's immediately something that disowns you from having any kind of skill or any kind of, like, value.
That's what I'm saying, though. Like, I know that. But I'm saying, like, he has to practice at some point. Mm-hmm. There's no way he could be that good at sword fighting without keeping up that skill and using it.
There's also the fact that he was they actually talk about how he's usually left alone to do, like, because he's pretty much seen as, man, who cares?
It's just one of those things, like, I mean, like, if you turned the corner and he was, like, standing in a room with, like, perfect pose, like, practicing, like, stances and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And then they see him, the fade, and he's like, drops the sword. Oh, hello. Like,
He also had 10 years to to be like, several years to be like, yeah. Or to kill off anyone who noticed. But also
Maybe.
the third and final part is that they actually do kind of reveal who he is in that final part that they actually solidify in the other books, but he is considered the best swordsman who lives right now. Yeah. But that character was supposed to have died, so being undercover.
It's just one of those things, like, again, maybe I'm not sure if I misread, but I got the sense that he had, like, a limp, or that, like, there was something wrong with his face, or that there was something wrong, like, it wasn't just, like, that he was slow mentally, it was that there was some physical deformity with him.
It was kind of like that, but he would hunch down. It was kind of like Superman. Like how with Superman, he's like slouches with this Clark Kent. He slouches, he wears baggier clothing, he doesn't do anything like not looking people in the eye, maybe. I don't know on that one. But effectively, he did a lot of physical acting to make it seem like he is someone to not be noticed.
Yeah.
To be a servant.
So, like, that's the thing. Either he's still the best, despite the fact that, like, something happened to him that injured him severely.
Actually, it's not something that injured him.
Yeah, so you're telling me, like, it was all just an act.
It's all just an act.
Yeah. In which case, it's just one of those things, like, I just can't believe that someone would keep up an act for, like, that long, and, like, no one knew?
Yeah, there are plenty of people who do.
Oh, okay.
It's called con men. They love to keep up an act, and they are pretty good at hiding it. He's maybe not a con man, but if you have the right kind of motivation, you can keep that. That's suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Discussion later, but
and there's a lot of stuff in here where it's like you gotta kind of suspend your disbelief. But that's one of those things, like, that brought my suspension to a breaking point.
Yeah.
It was good, like, it was still good, but it was, like, so close to the edge, like, I can't honestly say it was a great move.
Again, that, for me, put it the opposite way because of how, like, throughout the book, you get this feeling that Tavi has obviously not noticed any of these things about him, but that's also because they've been a homebody. They've been pretty much around their same house, and he's venturing out for the first time.
It's another example of, like, you as the reader can kind of understand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, from what you've seen of Fade, it's a great reveal. It's just when you stop to think about, like, the fact that he's lived in this town for so long, that everyone knows him, and that no one had, like, any idea except for maybe, like, the two people who he lived with.
Mm.
And even then, they kept up the thing the entire time. It just stretches my believability. It turns him into this, like, Batman-esque superhero, or this, like, Count of Monte Cristo, like, 20 years in the cell I planned.
Yes.
Waiting for this one moment to strike so that it would be dramatically relevant.
Yeah, fair point. But this is also a story, so.
Yeah, so it's like, if you like that kind of stuff.
But we've gotten off topic.
I should say, moving right on, though, the one point where it did break my suspension of disbelief,
mm-hmm.
where the tone just completely, I remember reading this, and I, like, tossed the book down, and I was like, are you fucking serious? I can't believe they did this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, let me paint the mood for you real quick. Most of the main characters, except for Tavi, who's the little boy that could, the little chosen one, they're all under siege by these barbarians that are riding with, like, wolves and essentially velociraptors, and they've been fighting them for, like, 12 hours straight, and the corpses are piling up, and they're like, we're not sure how long we can hold out, there's thousands outside. And then as the dawn is breaking, they look up, and suddenly a whole nother sect of the barbarians show up, and they're like, there's 5,000 more. There's no way we're going to be able to survive. And then someone makes a big speech, and they're like, we will fight them to the last man. And then you hear this rumbling as they come charging towards the gates, and the guys with the wolves break through, and then a guy riding a gigant, which they explained is basically Appa from...
Yeah, actually, it's a little bit bigger.
It's bigger than Appa.
Bigger and less cuddly looking. They're
Yeah,
pretty much
they're
giant.
basically big, like, mammoths, almost.
And gargant.
Gargants, okay, yeah. They use gargants almost like pack animals, but they're, like, elephant-sized. And then a gargant that's, like, 4 times the size of a normal one literally bursts through the stone wall, turns, and faces against the wolf clan and is like, "You've gone far enough." And it's like, "Oh, they're here to help." And then the main character looks up, and Tavi is riding on the back of the giant
Tavi
gargant.
is the main character.
Yeah, the little chosen kid is riding on the back of the gargant, and he turns to his uncle, who thought he was dead, who he hasn't seen in 4 days. He's like, "Hey, uncle, can we keep him?" I'm like, No, you can't undercut your entire dramatic sense with a fucking one-liner.
This is also a 14-year-old boy who is riding in on a giant creature.
He literally just rode in past the corpses of thousands of dead men.
We've also established that they're very high up.
They're not that high up.
Yes, they are.
Don't look on the side. Those aren't dead people. Those aren't intestines. There weren't like, the smell alone. They were talking about how many thousands of crows were out, like, earlier that day, picking at all the dead.
Actually, in the opposite direction. To be honest.
It's one of and just the fact that he could see him, like, he couldn't see the corpses, but he could see his uncle from up there and turn and, like, waved at him. It's like, and this was also after he risked his life and did all these things and almost got eaten by cannibals. And, like, won the trust of the barbarians in their, like, game of death. And just, like, the fact that he would be so casual and so happy and just, like,
yeah.
Hey there. Like, you could have just had it, like, he looks up and he sees Tavi up there and he just, like, looks bewildered and then waves at his uncle. Like, that would have been fine. But that cheesy fucking one-liner.
Again, this is a summer blockbuster. You gotta take it fun, man.
It's just like, everything before then was so dire and so serious, and then they're gonna be like, goofy one-liner.
Goofy one-liner save day, man. Goofy one-liner save day.
He saves the day.
Oh, man.
But yeah, I think that was pretty much the last thing I wanted to mention. Did you want to talk a little bit more about the sequels? You've been
I've been
them
hinting
a lot.
at it, but it's like, the sequels really, you grow with the actual main character of Tavi, is the main draw. And you actually get to, see him, one of the main interesting things about him is the fact that, like Joe said, and every character that is an Aleran, quote unquote, which are the normal human, the basic human race.
Everyone but the barbarians.
Everyone but the barbarians have the ability to use this, except him.
Yeah.
He is not allowed to.
He can't Furycraft, which would have made for, not only can he not Furycraft, but he's a short little weak kid.
Mm-hmm.
Which could be really interesting, but I don't feel like they ever made much with it.
They actually do in later books, and like
Yeah.
I said before, spoiler alert, you find out that his aunt is his mother, because family dynamics can never be simple in fantasy stories. And also that she's the reason why he doesn't have crafting, because she was
She suppresses it, doesn't she?
She suppresses it from him with her actual crafting, which is apparently incredibly powerful without her knowledge. And it actually develops by about the 4th book. At the very end, he gets it, and it's a kind of an awesome reveal. But also you get these characters that weave in and out together, like Isana, his aunt, develops a relationship with Fade, because they've been sharing this lie for 15 years about his parentage and about this story of what happened. And also, because he's apparently...
Yeah, we should mention real quick, for those who haven't read the book, when we say his aunt is his mother, we don't mean some incest stuff happened.
Like,
it's more
literally
like
all a lie.
They told him that his mother died. They told the town that he was adopted, essentially, or that they were taking care of him.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually Asana's kid.
Yeah, and
she was just like, I'm your aunt.
And in the first book, they show this relationship between the character of Amara, which is another one of the point of view characters, and Tavi's uncle Bernard. And it's they start this kind of romance, in the beginning of the first book that's actually, it doesn't feel contrived. It doesn't feel like...
Yeah, that was handled pretty
It was
well.
handled pretty well. And they grow it so very well, like through the entirety of the series. And it's handled with respect at the same time as kind of, yes, there is a bit of bump and uglies that happens in it a bunch, but it's still very, like, it feels very grounded. And then also the relationship between the main character Tavi and another character that you meet midway through the book, which is one of the barbarians, is handled. The relationships between paired off characters is really good, and also just the relationships in relating to all the characters is really well done. And like I said before, they build upon the world. You don't get this feeling of you're going to, these questions that you're asking are not going to be answered, period. Maybe they'll be answered unsatisfactorily, but they will be answered.
Yeah. I just really like, to me, like, a great story, like, great world building, great characters, it's not that you're asking questions, it's that you know the solution already exists. Like, if a world is really fleshed out, you don't get the feeling that, like, oh, this is a mystery. You get the feeling of, like, this is known, and I, as the reader, just haven't learned it yet.
Yeah.
But I will learn it by going forth. In this, it sort of feels like either they hadn't decided yet, or they're deliberately keeping something secret from you so they can reveal it dramatically, like, later on.
Which is cheesy, but it still has its merits. But for those of you waiting, the name of Big Sword Guy, dope as hell, Aldrich X Gladius, because you can't have a bigger dick.
Is that what you were just sitting here on your
I've been
phone
trying
distracted
to find
the whole time?
I've been trying to find it because it was dope, and I love that name.
Yeah, Aldrich X Glad. Yeah, I mean, it literally means Aldrich of the Sword.
Yeah, I mean, you can't.
If you know Latin, I took 3 years of Latin.
Okay, all right, Mister, I have a smart mind.
Yeah.
I just thought that when I read that, when I heard it over the I'm like, that's dope. That's a D&D character right there.
He's just pure muscle.
He's just like Aldrich X Gladius. Does he hit people? Yes. Does he do anything else? Does he need to?
Not with how hard he hits people.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those, like, he was a fun character, he was evil, but I understood his motivation, and he was never, like, needlessly cruel or stupid. I liked him.
Yeah.
He was fine.
Also, like, another thing that I really liked about it is I like to put myself in behind a character of sorts. And
He likes to project.
I like to project on certain things. And, it usually, because my name's Brandon, revolves around people with B names, if I can get it. His uncle, Bernard, is just this really fascinating character at the same time as being incredibly badass. Because, like, he's very, like, he's a soldier, but he's not the best soldier.
He is a former soldier.
He is a former.
He's not a soldier anymore.
He's that guy that got out of the military, but has never really had the military get out of him.
He's the strong old man, the West. He's not, like, old, but he's, like, middle-aged, and, like, his wife died, but he's like, I'm not ready to move on, even though it's been like 20 years, and he's just like, I'm an old-fashioned guy who does things right, and I raised my nephew just fine, I tell you what.
Yeah, I wouldn't give him that old of a voice, but yeah, he's in his, like, late 40s, and he's, the character that he displays of being just this kind of stoic, he knows what's right, and he's gonna keep on it, but also this kind of, like, militaristic background of being able to back up whatever, like, philosophy he has behind it. Really, I like that. And throughout the books, he just keeps getting more and more badass. But the other thing is, they made bow users cool. I'm sorry. I don't see that in a lot of fantasy. They're just like, hey, I can fire a bow, so can you. But they made it seem like
Oh, yeah, because the woodcrafters can make their bows, like, they can pull back strings that would be, like, way too hard normally, so then they can fire arrows, like, 2 miles or something.
Yeah, they can.
Or super straight.
They effectively are, like screw crossbows. Those are bitch weapons.
Yeah, that's one of the things that, like, the woodcrafters and when I hear metal crafter, my initial thought was like, oh, are they gonna summon, like, iron golems and stuff? And
yeah.
No, it's much more like metal crafters can just make their swords, like, better.
And
they can make their muscles, like, tough.
Yeah, they can make themselves, they can, eke out pain. Like, they're very tanky simply for the fact that, like, you can stab a metal bender, they shrug that off, literally. Steel, metal,
Fury crafter.
metal Fury crafter.
A metal crafter.
A metal crafter. You stab a metal crafter, and he would just be like, still attacking you because the pain he's already cut off.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting way of doing that, as opposed to making them into water benders, but with harder
Earth benders, but with metal, and then it's like, what makes metal and earth really all that different?
Yeah.
That they have entirely different furies and stuff like that. I don't know.
And the earth, the different like sub things that the benders crafters could do is pretty interesting. Like the earth crafters are able to like rile people up and that kind of way. And
the water people can bring people back from the dead.
It was more along the lines of they're definitely healer class. They're super healer class.
They can heal people because that's just what water does.
Yeah. And then was it wood? The wood crafters can mask their.
They can make stuff invisible.
Yeah, well, it's more like they make the shadows hide around them. But yeah, they do the cloak in. I
don't know. It's one of those things. Like, again, it just sort of it added to me to the sense that. The powers were, like, so big and so grand that, like, this world should be different with how much they can do. Because each powers, when you're an earth crafter, it's not simply a matter of, like, I can manipulate the earth. Or, like, the water crafter is probably the best, because it's not simply a matter of, like, they can bend water. They can also, like, send out things through the ground and make, like, water versions of themselves that can communicate from, like, far away.
Mm-hmm.
They can heal people. They can sense emotions. I think they can also manipulate people's emotions slightly. They're like slightly. They're like they can tell if you're telling lies and stuff like that. And they do have a thing. They're like, oh well, the courts have waterbenders to tell if you're doing lies or not.
They're able to manipulate. Waterbenders are able to manipulate their own emotions for the most part. The other people's are very different things. They're able to steal their emotions essentially.
Yeah.
Steal as Steele. But yeah,
it just feels like every Fury has like 20 powers that are associated with
20 powers, but again, force of charisma and genetics. You get into once you get into the bigger cities, you realize that the things that they're able to do in this book are like pittance, and it's really ridiculous what some of the characters do. Like one of the characters has literally a flipping phoenix that lands on her arm at one point, and she's a higher house, but she's not the big guy. The big, Caesar Augustus character is, he does one point, he actually spends most of one of these books, not using his powers because they can be detected from a distance. His furies are known, obviously, since he is the king. And at the end of the book, he just lets it all hang out and uses, fire crafting to form a sword. And at one point in time in this first book, they make an orb out of fire that makes all of the barbarians at the big siege, all the barbarians run back in fear and kind of be afraid. And that one's really hard to sustain. He crafts this sword out of the same thing, but it makes people literally die of fright. Their hearts stop. It's kind of cool, but yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what the point.
What the point was is again.
My point was I was like, man, these powers are overpowered. You think that's overpowered?
Yeah.
Let me tell you how they're even more overpowered. Well, that doesn't convince me at all.
It doesn't convince you, but it does show that if the higher class wanted to actually maintain the society that they have, they wouldn't encourage development in certain ways. They also wouldn't encourage progress as they have.
Yeah.
Because
it's just hard. I've seen things where wizards are put down, or wizards are oh, we're tampering your power to keep control, but it's a society where every single person is a wizard.
Yes. So it's essentially a world full of loaded guns, and everybody's got one.
It just imagine if you went to Hogwarts and it was just a regular school, except for they had magical light bulbs, and the teachers could tell if you were lying.
Yeah.
And it's no, it's because they can use magic, there's all sorts of wondrous things you could do, and there's not very much wonder to me. I don't know. You guys will have to comment in the comments. Let us know what you think about magic. Based on what you hear, do you like the magic system? Do you think it has its flaws? What kind of magic systems do you like? And also, the question I wanted to ask that I completely got skipped over before, about the stupidly evil villains. How do you guys feel about that? When there's a villain, like, I know some people really do like those villains who are like, I'm just evil for evil's sake. They like someone that they can just hate, who has no redeeming qualities, who has nothing to them. And it's like, I feel like I can, but only in like the case of like the Joker, where it's like he's redeemably evil, but he also has like substance to him.
I like, like substance, where it's somebody who's like, who's gonna hunt you down and murder you, but he's gonna hunt you down and murder you because it's just what he does. Not because like, hey, I'm just very evil. I know that's not a great way of describing
sort of
that.
Like, the Joker had like a philosophy to what
doesn't.
he did.
He physically, that's the thing that's scary about.
Or he pretended to.
He doesn't.
I'm talking specifically about like the Dark Knight movie, because that's what most people are familiar with.
Well, most people
are. If you want to
are.
talk about the Joker in general, you literally can't say anything because there's been so many interpretations about him.
Yeah, he's multiple choice.
Yeah, it's impossible to say anything for certain about him. But you're looking at like the most well-known interpretation of him, like the Dark Knight Joker that everyone's familiar with.
Even like, then, though, he's very nebulous and hard to pin down because he actually
he's nebulous and hard to pin down, but you get that like he has ideals. He burns the money when he could have kept it. That means that like something is more important to him than greed
money,
or sustaining himself. There's something to him that makes you think. If he was just like, he took all the money and then he used the money to buy a big bomb and then dropped it on people, and he'd be like, well, if he's just, and then like, I don't know, or used the money to buy more guns and then just shot a bunch of people, it'd be like, it's just boring.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm just interesting to know, like, at what point does, like, can a villain be just, like, unequivocally evil and still be interesting, or still not be a hindrance to the story at the very least?
The Tarkin factor.
I have no...
No, I just made it up.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think that's about it. We've reached all our things. Did you have any last, mementos you wanted to add in here?
No. If you find any of this information interesting, definitely check out more of us. And if you really found the information in this specific one, the book is Furies of Calderon. It's
How did you forget the name of the book?
It's staring right. I was thinking Codex Alera.
Okay.
And it's
well, I mean, hopefully you've already read the book if you listen this far.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, this is not meant to be something to like convince you to read the book. It's not even meant to like, if you haven't read the book, now you know about it. It's more just to talk about, like, interesting things, again, like the magic, like characters, things that are in stuff, but you've got unique examples within this book. I guess we should say the next episode we're planning to do, House of Leaves. I finally get to talk to that. It's going to be you, and we're going to have Bootleg Drew on here, so we're going to try out a 3-person format. Again, let us know what you thought of this 2-person format, both of us reading the book, letting you know how it was. We're still kind of experimenting with this. We've got like 5 episodes we want to do with different formats, so we'll be trying that.
This is a lot more freeform that we'd actually intended to do, so it did get off topic a few times.
Oh, that's fine. I expected to get off topic.
It's a podcast. It's what it does.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed, though. And like I said, just next time, House of Leaves, if you want to try to read it, we're doing this once a month.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a pretty difficult read. I mean, not to brag or anything, but, you know, I got through it.
Well, yeah.
If you're up for something a little challenging, it does not have an audiobook, which is why Brandon and Drew are
that,
not
and also
it.
It's spoopy. I don't like spoopy things.
Yeah, it's surprisingly like it's spoopy, but it's not like, I wouldn't call it a horror book.
Well, yeah.
After having read it.
After what you've described to me, it doesn't seem like a horror book, but it does seem kind of like vaguely like Marble Hornets and crap. But that's
I've heard some people call it a romance novel.
That's different.
When you get to the end, it would make sense.
I figured.
But yeah, check that out next time. Like, comment, subscribe. If you like this, share it around, tell your friends. We're trying to get more people on here. We're not sure exactly. It's probably going to be on its own channel, so we need to get to 1,000 subscribers before we could put an ad on here. Who knows? Maybe if we get that big, we can get Audible sponsorship.
Yeah, and I don't have to pay for all this.
Brandon can do that. Yeah, we'll see that. So thanks for watching. Until next time. Look in a book, reading Rainbow.
We still haven't pinned one down.
No, we still don't have an outro. If you have an idea for an outro, put that down below. Otherwise, it's just going to be like...
Time we close the book on this section. Ta-dun-dun.
Bye.